I just wanted to welcome all those that are joining us live on Zoom, and a special shout out to those who will be watching a recording of this time together later on a social platform. But again, welcome and thanks for tuning in. And now this is the Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to St. Mark. Now Jesus began to teach his disciples that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." And then he called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." That is the gospel of the Lord. And as has been my custom for a while, I'd like to begin this morning with the practice of Lectio Divina. I've given it acrostic REPS, R-E-P-S, standing for read, educate, pray, and sit. And after the first reading, what I would like for you to do is just get a sense of a word or a phrase that seems to be speaking directly to you from the passage. He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it." And again, now on this second reading, I'd like for you to discern a word or a phrase that seems to be speaking directly to you. He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it." Again, just pondering what meaning this passage might hold for you. And after a third reading, we enter into a time of prayer, simply coming before God with the question, "What have you to say to me through this verse today?" What prayer is evoked in your heart? If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. And finally, just a moment of contemplation on the experience of encountering this scripture. So in the aftermath of the fires, the glass fire specifically, there were a number of people, of course, in the valley that lost everything, their homes burned to the ground. And there were several families that I knew personally and have for many years who lost everything. And, of course, holding all those that lost so much in prayer, I, like everyone else, was wondering, what can I do? What can I do to help heal and begin the process of, the next chapter? And there were several of those homes. I've known these people for quite a long time. And I know that in their homes they had, in one way or another, a full collection of the crosses that I've made for people over the years. And I thought to myself, well, one of the things that I can do is just replace what I made in their homes that's been burned to the ground. And so I have. I've made a full vertical, and I've given a couple of them away. I have still more to give away. But I just thought I'd show you a little bit of show and tell this morning, some of the things that I've made. This is a cross box. I call it a prayer box that I made in 2008. This is when the economy tanked and discretionary income was at a premium. People were really worried about the financial state of our country and turned obviously to deal conservatively with their finances, which made discretionary income at a premium. And I wanted people to know how grateful I personally was for their financial support of the church. So to every pledging family, I gave one of these boxes. And I loved making them. They're quite a lot of work, but they make a great gift. And, I encourage people to just put their prayers in there. And a lot of people use them for their car keys or their cell phones or whatever. But anyway, that was the first year. Pretty good. Now, when 2009 rolled along, people began asking me, well, what are you going to do this year? So that's how traditions in the Episcopal Church get started. So this is a Jerusalem cross. Of course, when you go to the Holy Land, which I hope all of you have or will, you'll see these all over the Holy Land. They call the Jerusalem cross, obviously the Holy City, divided into 4 quadrants, divided between the Muslim quarter, the Arab quarter, and the Eastern Orthodox quarter, the Roman Catholic, and the Protestant quarter. So as is the Holy City divided, so is the Jerusalem cross. And of course, it goes out into 4 directions, north, south, east, and west, out, the gospel extending itself out into the world. So that was the second year. And then the third year, and this was a Celtic influence, I made this cross. And of course, this was inspired by the sabbatical I took to the sacred island of Iona. But here you have the cross, and there's a circle in it, which for the Celts signified, I think, the interconnectedness of all things, the human and divine, the nexus of the human and divine, certainly, but the inclusion of the natural world and the world of plants and animals and so forth, and our interdependence on each other. And that's the Celtic cross. I really like that. I think that's a beauty. The other, and this is a classic, I call it the Mac Classic. And it's a very simple cross. I found this design actually in a book I found in some dusty corner of the library at seminary of Anglican furniture, church furnishing. I think the book dated to the 19th century, sometimes a dusty old book. But this cross was featured in a cathedral in England, and I really like the simplicity of design. I've duplicated it hundreds of times over the years. I give these away to people that I marry. I put the names of the bride and the groom and the date of the wedding like that, and I give them this cross. I said, put Christ at the center of your marriage and blah, blah, blah. I've given them to confirmands and baptismal candidates and people that I love and whatever, but anyway, that's the classic. It doesn't get any better than that. And then another year after I came back from the Holy Land, I was keenly aware, as we all often are, of the fact that Christianity has deep roots in Judaism, and I wanted to do something other than a cross. So initially, I just made the Star of David, which has a complex and rich history. But I showed it to my wife. I said, "What do you think of the Star of David?" She said, "Well, I'm not sure whether to hang it on the tree during Christmas or what it is." And so, I decided to put a square around it. And then somebody said, wait a second, that's a Jewish symbol for Israel. We're not Jewish, we're Christian. You need to put a cross in there somewhere. So right in the heart of everything, there's a little cross. I kind of like that. It reminds us of who our grandparents are, our Judaic grandparents, and the roots from which we stem. As Rosemary read so beautifully this morning about the father of our faith, father free faith, actually, which is Abraham. Anyway, a lot of work in there, but that's a cute one too. Now, this particular cross, this is a missal cross. And on the cover, like I have a little book that I read from on the altar here. It's called a missal book or an altar book. And on the cover of the Anglican altar book, the Episcopal altar book, is this very cross here. And it's got, kind of a cute design. Again, it's a lot of work. But again, walnut and the contrasting wood with alder. And, that's a pretty nice cross right there too. And this one, when I took my daughter to Denver to go to nursing school, together we went to worship at the cathedral in Denver, St. Mark's Cathedral, beautiful cathedral in Denver. And in the narthex, they had a big, the cross was probably 4 feet high. The horizontal was probably 2.5 feet, something like that. But it was made of this laminated woods, and it was really quite lovely. I thought, I'd like to make a smaller version of that. So this one, and I call this the Resurrection Cross. Somebody said when they looked at it, boy, that light wood is really just popping off out of there like Jesus resurrected from the dead. So I call this the Resurrection Cross. That's a nice model too. Everybody should have a couple of those. And then this bad boy, this thing is not only a cross, it's a weapon. But anyway, when I went with the pilgrims to the church in Nazareth, to the Anglican church in Nazareth, sculpted in granite above the entrance to the church, and this is almost exactly the size of the cross that was above the entrance of the church in Nazareth. And again, a beautiful design. I liked the sculpting of it and so forth, but this was the biggest and the heaviest and the last of the crosses that I made. But anyway, again, I call that the Nazarus Cross. And, of course, this one here, lovely cross, is the one that I made for all those that are financially supporting St. Luke's this year. Thank you very much for your contribution. This is a beautiful Orthodox cross. I love the symbolism. Again, you can look that up on the internet, but the Orthodox is a beautiful design, again, symbolizing not only the death, but the resurrection of Jesus. So everybody should have, 2 or 3 of those. But, these crosses are beautiful. There's a cross in almost every Christian sanctuary that you'd ever walk into. It is our defining symbol. Every now and then you'll see, perhaps a fish or Alpha Omega, or a different symbol for Christianity. But there is nothing that says it like the cross. And while these crosses are beautiful, and they are, and most crosses in sanctuaries are beautiful, you have to understand that what this meant to a first century Jewish person was horrific. I can remember a number of years ago that there was a medical doctor that came to the church and offered a lecture on what actually happens in the process of crucifixion. And it was emblematic of Roman genius. I mean, they really needed to perfect keeping insurrection to a dull roar, and they did perfect it. And crucifixion was an educational tool for the Roman Empire. And it reminded people of what would happen to them if they tried to stand up against empire. And it was an educational lesson that came through very horrifically. I mean, death, they made a science of figuring out how long they could keep a human being alive in the midst of excruciating suffering for as long as possible. And so when Jesus was probably 5 or 6 years old, almost 2,000 Galileans were crucified by the Roman Empire in the region of the Galilee. And that was a one-time event, and probably as determining for the consciousness of Jewish people in the Galilee as, for example, 9/11 or something akin to that might have been for us. But it certainly kept insurrection down to a dull roar. And so Jesus says, take up your cross. And that means one thing to us whose homes are decorated with these symbols, but they would have meant something very different, especially to Peter and to the disciples. And, it's easy to judge Peter. I mean, God forbid, you can't let this happen to you. Don't be talking about going to Jerusalem and being killed. And, I missed the part about rising again. All I really heard was the part about being killed. But that's not the way it's going to go down for you, Jesus. That just cannot happen. And then Jesus offers in the midst, and Peter's gone, the full swing here. He's the one that first named Jesus, you are the Christ, the Messiah, that's the right answer. In the very next breath, he's saying, you can't let this death and resurrection happen to you. And so all of that gives fruit to perhaps the harshest rebuke in the Bible. Get behind me, Satan. You're putting your mind on human things, not on divine things. And Jesus doesn't, although Peter takes Jesus aside to offer his rebuke in private, Jesus wants to offer his rebuke in front of the disciples and everybody. Get behind me, Satan. You're an obstacle to me and to the mission I came to live out. And of course, in the midst of this congregation, Jesus turns not only to Peter, not only to the disciples, but also the crowd, and therefore to us, with the passage that I read this morning. If any want to become my followers, take up your cross and follow me. And up until that point, it would have been fun to follow, wouldn't it? I mean, being witness firsthand to the miracles, how cool would that be? To the healings, how cool would that be? Watching Jesus restore sight, seeing the adulation of the crowds and the popularity growing, just imagining the political power and the prestige that would come from even hanging out and being in the company of Jesus, how wonderful would that have been? And so when Jesus said, hey boys, how do you like those miracles? Yeah, we love those. How do you like that teaching? Oh, man, the teaching touches my heart. Well, so is everybody in? You want to follow me? Yeah, I'll follow. Where are we going? Well, here's where we're going. We're going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to get killed. And so, don't be too hard on Peter because you'd have been right there with him. Now, I'm having second thoughts now. Now that you mention, where all this is going, I'm a little bit reluctant. Taking up a cross, not very appealing. Losing my life? Wait, you didn't talk about that earlier. And so we're now into the cost of discipleship. And, verses like this are terrifying. For a lot of different reasons. One, because they demand a lot of us, of course. You can't hear Jesus saying this and not quake a little bit in your shoes, as, is understandable. But what's most dangerous about this particular passage is the way that it's been understood. And the way that theologically, different aspects of the church, different people, different theologians have built an understanding about the meaning of the cross around it. The worst being that we're just so depraved. We're just so depraved that a sacrifice was necessary in order for us to get off the hook. That understands the depravity of the human condition and the exorbitant length that God had to go in order to effect our release. Guilt-inducing. Just a theology that makes people feel worse than they already do about who they are. Is that helpful, really? That in exchange for God's love, we have to suffer? That somehow we deserve the terrible things that happened to Jesus and to people because how far we've come from hitting the mark of loving one another. And so, this is a dangerous verse. And it brings to mind the whole notion of suffering, which every major religious expression on the planet addresses directly, not the least of which, and probably the best of which, is the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism that begins with the existence of suffering. Suffering is a condition of life. If I ask most people, what is the first book in the Bible? What is the oldest book in the Bible? What is the oldest book in the Bible? Most people will say, well, probably Genesis. That's where it starts. And that would not be the correct answer. The correct answer for what is the oldest book in the Bible is the book of Job. And it comes out of an ancient Sumerian tale that talked about a perfectly innocent and great guy whose name was Job that the devil decided to mess with and that God allowed. And the question that the book of Job asks is, why do terrible things happen to perfectly innocent people? And it's an ancient and a really, really good question. And we want to know why terrible things happen to us, to the people that we love, and why suffering is such a huge part of the human experience. And doesn't matter really if we can understand why. Why do we suffer? Why do these things happen? Why, if we have no control, do such terrible things happen? The only thing that we have any control over whatsoever, even minutely, is what we do about them. Are we victimized by them? Do they control who we are and how we think? Or somehow do we come into relationship with them and understand them deeply? The rebuke that Jesus offered Peter was, Peter, you're not looking at this the way you should look at it. You're looking at what I just said through human eyes, of what impact it's going to have on you. You're not looking at it through the eyes of God. You're not looking at it as though this may be a divine thing. And so what happens, as I understand human suffering, is that there's no way of denying it. There's no way around it. There's no way of tiptoeing through it. You have to confront it. You have to deal with it. You have to meditate on it and transcend it. And you have to follow Jesus through it. You have to follow Jesus through it. And, even as I, ride my bicycle out along Lake Hennessy and Lake Berryessa and look up into these hills and see the charred remains of homes and forests and all that, even today in this magnificent weather, what's coming up through it? What's coming up through it is new life. The interesting thing about Jesus' teaching, he said, I'm going to go to Jerusalem. And I'm going to be arrested by the religious authorities. And they're going to kill me. And in the third day, I'm going to rise again. So he predicts his death and his resurrection. And it's easy to hear just the first part, because this is the attack on the self. And so, the thing about the meaning of cross is, when asked, well, what is the meaning of the cross? And it depends on who you ask. I think what's most important about the meaning of the cross is what it means to you. And the reason that one of these or a number of these should hang in your home is that you should gaze on it and just ask, what's going on there? What's happening? What do we draw from the crucifixion? Why the cross? Why the worst possible thing that can happen to a human being would happen to the very best human being that ever blessed the earth with his presence? These are profound questions. And what happens is that they expand the mind and you go beyond it. You know, one of my favorite contemporary mystics is Cynthia Bourgeois, and she offers a whole retreat on the meaning of the cross for contemplatives. And one of the things that happens when you confront your meditation cushion is that you don't want to go there. You'd rather do something else. You'd rather get something done. You'd rather, you know, when the alarm goes off, you'd rather get about the business of your life and sitting down and doing nothing. For what? Well, because you have to put your life aside. You have to put your life aside and say, there's something more important than my selfish life that I need to let God do than I want to do. And so every time you sit to meditate, there's a bit of a crucifixion. There's a bit of a dying to the ego who wants to be pampered and being about the business of being productive and looking good and getting the acclaim that it deserves for being the wonderful ego that it is. And the more that we sit and the more that we let go, the more that we lose our life, something else happens in our hearts. And we become aware in a very profound and real way that because of who we are, we don't suffer. Because of who we are, we're loved. Because of who we are, we're loved. And so when we take up our cross and we say to ourselves, this is suffering, this is my life, this is what I'm going through, this is what I'm in. But it's not, the reason is not because I'm a bad person. The reason because it's, you know, there's a fundamental transcendence that's happening here that God's doing in my heart and in my life. And, you know, the amazing thing that comes from suffering, and how many of you have seen this all the time, every day, that, you know, when terrible things happen to people, and they happen all the time, on the other side of that comes an unexpected spiritual growth and learning. Life becomes more precious and fragile. Love becomes, you know, the most, precious commodity. And this is what the cross teaches us. So it's not an easy lesson to learn, but here in the second Sunday of Lent, again, we're called to learn it. Amen.
Contributions to St. Luke's Episcopal Church help to make the digital ministry and other outreach within the community possible. If it is in your heart to make a donation, St. Luke's secure PayPal link, as well as the church's mailing information, may be found in the description of this video. Thank you.